to episode 4. Tonight we're going to be covering the Grid Designer, and I'm also going to be touching base on a couple of questions that were posed about the Sketch tool and the Sketch library. I'm going to give us a second to get some people here with us. Hope everyone's having a good January, coming down to the end here. I've had a lot of questions over the years about the Grid Designer and how to create your own grids, so hope we can get those answered today. I'm going to be going over how to create indoor grids and football grids. And if there's any other grids that you'd like to be seen created, we can go through those as well. All right. Well, let's take a look here. The Grid Designer is a fully visual grid designer that allows you to create your own custom grid. It's found in your Utilities menu under Grid Designer. And basically, it's going to show you what your grid looks like. You've got your bounding area, which is going to be identified by a red line. It's a bounding box. And what you want to do is you want to make sure your grid is centered to make sure that everything aligns properly. By doing so, you're going to have a negative and a positive on the dimensions. So basically, you're going to have your grid and you're going to split it in half, and you have that centered across that crosshair in the center. In the top left corner, you're going to see grid divisions. This is what's going to identify the size of the actual square for one step. So what I'm going to be doing is I've got, by default for a football field, I've got 8 steps per 5 yards, so that'll give you your 22.5-inch step. This also gives you the ability to change it into meters. Feet was added previously, however, it does not work properly with the real view. We suggest using yards or meters depending on which grid that you're working with. The center area is going to be grid options, is going to allow you to toggle between lines and dots, depending on which you want to see on your actual drill chart. Also allows you to decide on the step size, or I'm sorry, the step division. So if I only want to see every 2 step, I can change this here, but still you're going to have the grid that's going to snap to every 1 step. 3-step grid and 4-step grid here. And then you have the ability to create different weights of the grid itself. This was added in version 9. Allows you to increase the thickness of the yard lines if you want those to be bolder, of the tick hashes, anything else that you want there. You're able to change those. Let's say we wanted to change our sideline, let's say to 2. What that's going to do is it's going to increase the thickness there for you. Let's change that back down to 1 1/4 just for our default. All right, and the right section, this has to do with your markers. This is going to give you the size of the markers, so you can actually enter the height of the markers in yards or in meters, depending on which one you're working with. So I can say that I want let's say I had 1.33 yard markers. That's going to adjust the size of the markers. You have the ability to flip your backside markers to be facing backfield. You also have the ability to enter the location of the bottom of the markers directly. This gives you the ability to enter the exact location of the markers to make them appear in the location that they are on the field. The measuring inward and outward changes the way the automatic numbers are generated. If you measure outward, it's going to take from the center and go out. Inward is the default. So you measure your yard lines 0 to 50. You can also change the marker font to be anything that you would like as well. Let's say Courier New. We wanted to change that. If we wanted to download a font that looks closer to what you have on the field, a stenciled font, you can do that. Okay. Adjusting. Let's go down through the description of the rest of everything here. This information here allows you to identify markers, show the markers for your division line. So what we have here, let's go over the division type or line marker types. We've got a minor line, which is going to be your small oval. It's going to be your light blue color that is normally set up as your 4-step grid. You've got a major division line, which is a yard line. It's going to have a number that can be utilized to print coordinates with. So any of these large ovals will appear on the coordinate list. It's going to appear as, let's say, a 5-yard line, or if I wanted to enter a custom marker value, I can enter that here. Let's say I wanted to reference the top of the numbers, say top back numbers. So you can actually now utilize that in your coordinate sheets as a reference point from front to back. To add any additional lines, you would pull it from the bin from the top right to go on your vertical axis, or the lower left to go on the horizontal axis. Continue on. The large rectangle is going to be your hashes. You're able to put hashes on your major division lines. The small square is going to be hashes on your minor lines. So this could be used just as different reference points. Major hashes will be used in referencing coordinate sheets. Minor hashes are not. So if you wanted to have a different set of hashes that you want to be able to be seen, let's say you want that you have NCAA and high school hashes painted, but you want to only reference the high school or NCAA, you can set one set to the major division line hashes and then one set to the minor division line hashes so that you can see both of them but only reference one of them. And this small rectangle is going to be your yard line gax. So you can drag those down and add them where you want them. To remove any of these, you can simply drag them off the window or right-click on them, and that will remove them. In the lower right or lower left-hand corner, you're going to have 3 different options. You've got your minor lines, which are your blue lines, which are not included in coordinates. Your major division lines, which will be included in your coordinates, and then you have your minor hashes. And those will be your options for the lower left. You can zoom in and out on this so that you can more fine-tune your yard lines. You can shift it around. Okay. Across here, you're going to see the locations of the minor lines. Since they do not have labels, you'll have the locations of the minor lines listed on the horizontal and vertical axis here. You're able to customize your colors of your grid. There have been many different discussions about eye strain. So this is where some people are using yellow backgrounds and different colors on their design grid for longevity, longer usage periods, trying to reduce eye strain. And that's what these options are for here. You can change your background grid. Let's say I wanted to a light yellow. And that's going to appear. Then you can save that grid as a display grid. Do a save as. And we're going to see our grids here, so I can save this as my display grid. And I can load that on any drill that I want. And you're able to print using a different grid than what you have selected by default. You can do that inside the print grid, in the print charts and the print coordinates windows. You can have different grids set up there so you can have them reference different ones when you're printing charts without having to change it in the grid designer. Okay, that's a quick overview here. Well, let's touch base on the floor cover. If you have the floor covers plugin, you're going to have an option here to insert the floor cover. You simply click on that, click on the floor cover that you want, and it's going to insert beneath the design grid. To remove it, you simply click the floor cover, press cancel, and that'll give you the option to remove it. Okay, now that we have a grid looking here, we have a question here: how to make a floor cover using Photoshop or GIMP. So basically, if you're doing an indoor grid, let's actually load up an indoor grid. We have several different indoor grids already created for you. We've tried to cover all of the bases based on what we've received in the past. So creating a floor cover, what you're going to want to do is take the size of your grid that you need. So for our example, it's a 50 by 70, and we want to create an image in Photoshop at that same ratio. So it'd be a 5 by 7 ratio. So to make it easier to edit, I would suggest doing a 1000 pixel tall by 1400 pixel wide image, and that's going to give you your 5 by 7 ratio, and then you can then create the floor cover. Create the image, design it how you wish. If you have a print quality file already that you've sent to the printer for your floor cover, what you can do is open that inside of Photoshop or GIMP and then resize it down to that 1000 by 1400 for 50 by 70. You do not need to use a print quality image because that will load. It won't load properly. You'll run out of graphics memory. There's no need to use that size of image in your design on the real view or the design grid itself. Good question, Phil. Let's see here. I had a request to show that. Let me pull up my Photoshop here. Let's see if I can't get this to pull over. Right now I can't show my Photoshop currently, so I'm not going to be able to follow through with that. But what I'll do is I'll set up another live stream after we're done with this, and we'll walk through that directly on how to create an image from beginning to end. Okay, so let's talk about how we've created this 50 by 70 grid. I have a 5 by 5, 50 by 70 grid, so that means that the squares here are going to be 5 foot by 5 foot. That means our stride size is a 30-inch step or a 6 to 5. So if we got 30 inches here, 30 inches here, 60 inches, so that means our minor sections are 5 foot sections. And then we have this by default set up at as 10-foot major sections, you can actually, if this is too few division lines for you, you can come in and adjust that by adding in more division lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag these and have my major division lines, which are represented on my coordinates every 5 feet here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add more division lines. Okay, as you see, as I add more division lines, it's going to automatically label them whatever their location is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my custom marker option here, and I'm going to change them to letters. Continuing on for my reference. Okay, so I've added my major division lines. So now I'm going to have a coordinate reference every 2 steps if I wanted to have that. So every seam, let's say we had 5-foot seams here, every seam I'm going to have a coordinate reference printed out. Okay, now let's say that I don't have a nice 50 by 70 grid. I have a 48 by 78. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at that, and so I've got 70 feet left to right currently, so I need to change that to 78. It's going to be a little bit of math, so I'm going to take 78 feet. I'm going to divide it by 3 to get my yards, which gives me 26. And then I'm going to divide it in half. That's going to give me my positive and negative values. So divided by 2, that's going to be 13 yards left to right. So what I'm going to do is I need to expand my grid area, and you do that by simply dragging this box here. Okay. Now, the problem I have is at my stride size that I have, the 30-inch step, I can't actually get an exact location. So this is where we're going to come in and get a little more specific. We're going to increase the size, or I'm sorry, decrease the size of the steps. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down to 1 step equals 1 foot. So if I do 15 steps to every 5 yards, or I can come down here, I can change it 3 to 1, 3 steps to every 1 yard as well. That's easier for you to reference. So now each one of these steps is 1 foot. This is going to allow me to adjust my boundary here to the exact size of my grid. Okay, let's do 48. So we've got 48 foot divided by 3. That's going to give me 16 divided by 2, 8 foot front to back, positive and negative 8. Okay. So now I've got my new grid size, and it is centered. Now, at this point, I can come back and change it back to a 6 to 5 stride. However, that gives us one binder dilemma. We need to be able to have either our front or our back on a whole step. So this is where you would kind of want to decide where your where you'd want to have the exact number at. For indoor, I've received a lot of feedback where you have your pit in the front, so you don't actually need to have an exact yard line on the front. So most people are liking to put it towards the back. All right, so what I would do is I would move this, my back sideline, to make it snap here. Okay. All right, so now I have my 48 foot. I'm going to divide that by 3 to get my yards. So I have my 16, and what I need to do is I need to find the rest of this number here in order to get it pulled back. So I'm going to subtract the number that I have, 8.333. So that gives me 7.667. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my grid divisions back to 3 steps every 1 yard. And I'm going to align that to my 7.667. Since this is not on a whole step, I'm not going to put a division line here to have it be referenced in the coordinates. So now I'm going to put this back to my 6 to 5. And now I have my 48 by 78 grid listed here, and I have coordinates that are going to reference on all of the seams that I have access to that are on a whole step. I know that's quite a bit of information there. Are there any questions on how that's done or how it's calculated? The 6-foot grid is very similar. So we've got, it's similar to what we're using to change. So a 6-foot grid is either going to have a 12-inch stride or a 24-inch stride, depending on your preference. The 12-inch stride, again, is a 3 steps every 1 yard. So that's going to give you a 12-inch stride here. And this is going to create the grid where it's going to show you the steps, and it allows your console and your tools to snap to this grid. If I wanted to do a 24-inch stride, you would enter the information of 3 steps to every 2 yards. So that's going to give me steps every 24 inches. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I've got my step grid the way I want it. I'm going to now adjust it. Let's see here. Eight and 8. Since our step grid lines up, we can now shift everything. All right, so I've got let's take a look here. So I'm going to then make my division lines snap to my every 2 steps, or which is going to be every 4 foot. Or if you have 6-foot seams, you would do 3 steps. So I'm going to adjust these to be every 3 steps. Three. So now I have my major division lines every 6 feet for my 6 feet seams. And I would do the same for 4-foot seams if I had that as well. I would need to come in and also adjust my horizontal lines. All right, just snap these over. Okay, so now I've made my grid snap to a 6-foot style grid with 24-inch steps. And let's take a look here, see if I have a floor cover that we can load just to show on this. Looks like I have one to test with here. Let's see what size it is. Looks like it is a 50 by 70. So let's go ahead and load that one up here. My floor cover, that's called, let's see if I can't find it again. And put in a location that we can easily find it. Okay. So I'm going to load my grid. And now I have my floor cover loaded. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And now I have my floor cover showing here. Now, zoom in on our grid here. By default, when you load a floor cover, it's still going to draw your grid lines over this. You'll need to load a floor cover for this to not be shown. You have an option of showing your major lines and your minor lines together. This is your toggle here. It's going to load in a third button there for showing the surface. So let's say I just want to show a surface of, let's see, I just want to do a solid color. So I want to do black surface. Okay. So what it's going to do, since I have my floor cover loaded, I'm going to load just a generic black surface. So I have a black area around that. And now that's going to toggle the surface mode on. I can toggle in between all three of these options. My major division lines, and then my major and minor division lines. Okay, so that's how we can create a grid. Let's touch base on adjusting a football grid from a rounded off or non-accurate football field to a true or accurate football field that accounts for the additional step in the third that is not compensated for when we use the 22.5-inch steps. So let's find my default grid here. Okay, let's remove our floor cover. So my default grid is a high school grid that does not accommodate for the additional step in a third. We do include grids that are called true NCAA and true high school, which do incorporate the additional step in a third. So you can load one of those directly. This is just going to be an example on how to adjust it for yourself. So what we're going to do is we're going to break it down to where we have our stride size be a third of a step. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my backside line back one step, and then I'm going to move my hash back one step as well. Then I'm going to need to move the back hash and the backside line back one third of a step. So what I'm going to do is top to bottom change the stride size from 8:5 to 24:5. And what that does is now every step that you see here front to back is going to be a third of a step. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my hash. I'm going to move it back a third of a step. I'm going to, I moved the wrong one. Let me move this way. All right, so back a third of a step, and I'm going to find my back sideline and move it back the 1/3 of a step as well. So now I am accommodating for the additional step and a third. In my field grid. So now, as you can see, I have an additional step and a third for my back hash and an additional step and a third on my back sideline. So that gives you the exact 160-foot front to back, and it gives you your 22.5-inch stride side divisions. And do we have any questions about how to adjust a rounded grid to be a true grid? If we wanted to do NCAA hashes, we'd move those in 4 steps towards the center. We can adjust that. So this would be our location for our NCAA hashes. So now I've accommodated for my additional step and a third at NCAA hashes as well. All of these, any grid that you create, you can save, and then it can be loaded directly for any drill that you have. What I would suggest is for anything that you're changing your grid divisions on, I would suggest try not to design your drill until you've set up the stride size you want to work with, because what you're going to do, let's say if I'm working on an 8-to-5 grid, I've set performers to locations there. If I load a 6-to-5 grid, I'm sorry, let's say a 6-foot grid where I have stride sizes of 2 feet, they're not going to line up on an actual yard line. So you'll need to adjust those or snap those to the grid. Let's take a look, just give you an example here. Remove my floor cover. So I'm dealing with a 6-foot grid at a 24-inch step. So I'm going to put a performer down. Okay, so I've got a performer down here. Let's put another one on a yard line. If I come in here and load a new grid, let's say I wanted to do a 5x5 instead of a 6-foot. As you can see here, I have the yard line set up here. However, since my stride size was different, I was dealing with a 24-inch step, and now I'm dealing with 30-inch step. My performers will not be matching the grid. So it's important to start out with a grid that has the grid divisions that you're looking for in order to have it apply properly. Otherwise, there will be a little bit of rework need to be done with the drill. Now, we do have a function called Shift All. It's under the Utilities menu. This gives you the ability to shift all performers on the field for all counts at once. So if you need, let's say you decide that you need to shift everybody back 4 steps, this functionality will take the entire drill and shift it in the direction that you want for the entire drill. So you don't have to rework that. You can actually just shift everybody around. So if you're editing the size of the grid, let's say you're working with a 50x70, but actually it is a smaller field, let's say a 40x60, you're then able to adjust that to a 40x60 grid and then shift everybody back to have the same relative reference point without having to rewrite your drill. Okay. Well, that kind of covers the grid designer function. Are there any questions before I move on to the questions that I've received about the sketch library and sketch tool. Anything that we want to touch on for the grid designer at all? All right, if there's no questions, we're going to go ahead and move on. Now, we did have some questions emailed in on how to best use the sketch library to build different sets to use. We had questions about if we wanted to have separate files for different types of shapes or separate files for different types of groupings. That's going to be really personal preference. Now, you might find if you want to have the same type of shapes, let's say we wanted to do cover down blocks, and you want to have it grouped different ways. Let's say I wanted them grouped vertically and horizontally. I would probably recommend putting those all in one cover down block file, one cover down sketch file. So what I can do here, let's create a new sketch library. Let's call it cover down blocks. Give a full description. Cover down blocks, horizontal and vertical groupings. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create that, and then I'm going to just go ahead and open that as editing it. So I'm going to edit this file. It's going to open our file here to be edited. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is, let's say I want 10 different block sizes. I want block sizes from a 2x2 to a 10x10, and I want to have a horizontal and a vertical grouping for each of those. So that's going to be 18 pages here. Okay, so I'm going to insert 18 pages. All right. So page 1, let's start with my cover down block. Let's say I wanted to pull this in. I'm going to actually adjust my grid designer. I'm going to load my default grid because I want these to be referencing a football field. So I'll load my default grid. So they're going to be the correct spacing. And to zoom in and out on your grid, you can hold your control key and use your zoom or your mouse wheel, or you can turn on the grid zoom, grid shift option. If you right click, it's going to zoom in. If you control right click, it's going to zoom out, and you also have access to your mouse wheel for adjusting the zoom. Okay, so I'm going to do a 2x2. Okay. So I have it as a 4-step. When I create a block with my block tool, the point 1 to 2 is going to define the groupings. So it's going to have my groupings running horizontal since I put my point 1 and point 2 on top. My point 1 to point 3 is going to indicate where it's going to start repeating the rows. Okay, so if I go ahead and accept that here, I've got my 2 lines here that are creating my block, and they're grouped horizontally. There's also a question about how to identify it quickly in the sketch library. You can actually come in here and set the title for this tab. And let's say I have a 2x2 horizontal. And what that's going to do is it's going to show up in the sketch library as the title. So when you're toggling through, you have information there to work with. So I'm going to continue on. I'm going to have this be vertical. So I'm going to have it be 2x2. I'm going to do vertical here. So now when I accept this, as you can see here, my lines are now grouped vertically. Okay, let's just do a couple more here. Let's do our 3x3. So I've got my 3x3 horizontal, and we can do a 3x3 vertical. Get my 4x4 horizontal, and then do the same thing for 4x4 vertical. Okay, so now that I've got a couple of these created, I'm going to go ahead and save it. Let me go ahead and create a new file so you can see how that name reference works. All right, so I'm going to load my sketch library. Okay, cover down, here we go. So now you can see here I've got my 2x2 horizontal name here. If I toggle through, I can actually see those names listed here. Now, also what you're going to have is in your console the number of points, data points that you're working with. So you can be toggling through here and see how many sketch points that you're working with and identify it easily the number of positions that are in that block. That way you can quickly traverse through your file looking for the correct size block. And the same thing goes for triangles or wedges. So this gives you the functionality to save things easily and quickly reference them. Let's see here. So basically the bottom line is going to be what's going to work best is what's going to be working best for you. There's not really a specific way of doing this. That when we've created it, we made it to be super flexible. But based on the questions I received about how to organize them, I would recommend organizing them by the styles of shapes. So a cover down block, and then give you your options for vertical and horizontal in the same file, and then you can do your staggered blocks, and then with the groupings like you would want vertical and horizontal. Same thing with different types of pods. Let's say you're working with pods a lot. I would then do a pods file, whether they're created with circles or polygons or anything else that might be asymmetrical. Create a pods with, let's say, a 4-person pods file, and then do a 6-person pods files where you have different pods of different shapes in the same the same performer count with different types of pods. That way you have your different pod files that you can access easily. So, were there any questions about the sketch or the sketch library tool while we're in it currently? Are there any other questions that you might have for today? We can cover those right quick before we sign off for the night. We've gone on a little bit longer than normal, so. All right, well, if there's no new questions for tonight, then I'm going to bid y'all farewell. It was a wonderful night having y'all here at Pyware Night School. We'll see you next Wednesday at 9 p.m. Central. If you have anything that you'd like to see, please reach out to us, Facebook, message, email, or post on the Facebook group. We'd be happy to cover it. Y'all have a wonderful evening.